Morning is going to be, we have three school superintendents, Jeanice from Ann Arbor, Scot Graden from Saline, and hopefully Nikolai Vitti from Detroit is going to be joining. And they are going to be talking, giving us an update on what has been happening and what pressures there are, and then the outlook for the school year. And then Amy Dittmar, who is at the provost office at U of M, so she'll do the same, talking about what to expect at U of M. And then Adam Pasick will be summarizing. He's been covering this from a national perspective as a newsletter editor at the Times, New York Times, and he'll give us his reaction to the speakers and talk about how this might fit into the national picture and what he's hearing. So that's the format. Those of you that have not been part of Leaders Connect, I'd like to welcome you. Leaders Connect has been going on for about 20 years. And I think the world felt I was getting a little bit stale, so they decided to give me the challenge of creating a new format, because we used to meet about 100 people crammed into a little room at Zingerman's Roadhouse. And we switched to Zoom when the crisis has hit, and we've been going almost every other week since March. So we've been trying to keep up on topical interests. The leadership community tunes into the Zoom, mostly leadership from Ann Arbor and 30 miles around it. And we have probably about 60 people that signed up for this morning. So we have a good turnout. And I'm going to turn things over at this point. We're going to, just a couple of things. We will be using the chat. So if you have questions to any of the speakers or general questions, please put it in the chat. And when we open the chat, I'll be asking people maybe to ask the questions directly rather than reading them. So part of the Leaders Connect is trying to connect people. So hopefully we can introduce some of the people who are here, and there's a lot of great resources. And we will put this on a Zoom cast, which will be available Monday, and that will have the chat with it. And so anybody who wants to tell others about it can find it there. We have all the Zooms from past ones, including last week, where we focused on the crisis from the medical perspective. That was a very interesting one. So Jeanice, are you ready to start? Jeanice Swift is the superintendent of Ann Arbor schools for the last several years. And she has been in the forefront of trying to manage this and manage a lot of parent pressure too. I understand as parents have organized in Ann Arbor, so you have lots of factions to deal with. So Jeanice, can you give us your perspective on what's happening so far in Ann Arbor?
Well, Rob, thank you. It's great to be with you all this morning. Is this volume in, am I coming through all right here?
Yeah, you're fine, yeah.
Very good. Well, just a quick overview of where we've been. Obviously, the COVID pandemic, it's no surprise to anyone, has posed just really among the most complex challenges that school districts across Michigan and across the country have ever faced. We've really been working in many areas on emergency management since that day on March 12th, when the governor directed the closure of public schools in order to try to mitigate the rise of COVID infection. We've been focused really in about 5 key and critical areas. One is in providing a safety net for our students. 1 in 4 students in Ann Arbor come from homes impacted by poverty. So we take that role and responsibility of that social safety net very seriously in Ann Arbor. And that's involved providing food distribution. We began that right away on the Monday following our dismissal at midday on Friday. Working around devices, providing a device for every child in the district, and also supporting with connectivity to homes. We're using both the hotspots that we have purchased, and also working with Comcast to pay the monthly charges, currently supporting over 600 of our families with connectivity in order to do the virtual learning. The needs of students, their social, emotional, mental health, academic, and all of those needs that we're normally working with in an in-person environment. We have our team fully deployed to support our students in the virtual environment as well. And we've been working with an outdoor enrichment program through our Rec and Ed, just wanting to make sure that our students have an opportunity to get outdoors, to have some social interaction as well. We've built the virtual learning environment. We sure didn't suppose that we'd be using it as long as we have, but we have built that very robustly to support a smoother virtual engagement this fall than what we had last spring, of course. We've been working to prepare our buildings. It's the third area that we've been busy in with water testing and water quality, working with indoor air quality, with ensuring the signage for social distancing is affixed inside all of our buildings. So we are working to remain in a state of readiness to return. We're monitoring the progress, and obviously the things that we look at to make those decisions has changed dramatically over the months as we've learned more about this infection, the COVID situation, and currently that light that we're all hearing about, which is the vaccine. And we're very interested to see how that could impact and really be a game changer for our ability to get back into face-to-face learning. Our area that we will continue to be focused on is we understand that this disruption in our education, particularly for students with specialized learning needs, second language students, and really all of our students, we understand that over the coming 3 to 5 years, we will need to stay on a catch up and keep up, and infusion, recovery services, restoration and recovery will be our focus over the coming years to ensure that we're helping our students to get their growth and their learning and their social adjustment and everything they need to be able to move forward from this COVID time. So that's just a little bit of an overview, Rob. It's not comprehensive by any means, but I hope that it's helpful in some way.
Well, it sounds to me, Jeanice, that there's some things that are going to be beneficial in the long run. This is speeded up change. I know you've been an advocate of change in the schools. Can you tell us a little bit about where you think there may be dramatic positive changes that come out of this?
You know, Rob, I appreciate that question. I was just in a meeting with President Schlissel from U of M, and he was raising that question of what are the innovations that we've implemented that we'll want to hang on to. And we're excited as we get past the first of the year in 2021 to begin to have those conversations. For example, the devices at home that allow a student to spend extra time on the math or reading, you know, some of those innovations we'll want to keep. Each of those devices is fully equipped with a robust library. So for the first time ever, every single child in our district, no matter their background or their socioeconomic status, has at their fingertips both an academic reading library and a regular, you know, enrichment reading library with millions of titles. So that's just one example of the innovations. We're also excited that our students are able to participate in classes across campuses, you know, and we've not done a lot of that prior, but for students to be able to engage in an upper level course or a specialized course altogether from their home, that's quite an innovation. So we'll be having those conversations after the first of the year to to see what among these changes we'll want to keep as we move out of this pandemic time.
Well, that's the part that I find hopeful, is that we'll be able to see this kind of thing where you're collaborating with Comcast, you're collaborating with universities, you're collaborating, different across the rec and ed you mentioned, so that education is kind of opening up, hopefully with businesses as well, where you get students in internships and all those kinds of things. So we begin to think about education from a much wider perspective.
Jeanice, can I ask? I'm a Ann Arbor public school graduate, very loyal. What's the status? What are you guys thinking about in terms of reopening?
Well, I appreciate that question. We continue to monitor the data every week. We have a set of metrics, as every district does, but we're very interested now as we move. I don't think any of us had perfect prior understanding of how exactly this pandemic would unfold, but we're very encouraged that educators have been prioritized in section 1B of the vaccination process. So it is entirely possible. And again, we don't know how this thing will roll out exactly. It's a little bit too early to know those details, but it's entirely possible that we'll be able to return with a higher level of confidence on our return. And we continue to monitor that each week. And we update our community as we move forward with that process.
Thank you. Let's go to Nikolai. Vitti, Nick, are you Nikolai there? Good morning.
Good morning, Nikolai. Yes, I'm here.
Nikolai's from, he's the superintendent of the Detroit Community Schools. And Nikolai, it's good to see you again. Can you give us an update on what you're experiencing in Detroit, what the anticipation is, what kind of innovations you maybe have discovered along the way?
Sure. I'll quickly just give a summary of, where we were, where we are, and where we're headed regarding responding to the pandemic, and I'll address the innovation question if that makes sense.
Sure.
So obviously, I think everyone on the call knows that Detroit saw a disproportionate impact regarding COVID, unfortunately, especially with deaths, and so it shook the nation, it shook the world, but it especially hurt us in Detroit. And so when we were first dealing with the pandemic, I was one of the first superintendents to call for the closing of schools. The governor did the right thing and did that. Right away, you saw the impact of racial injustice and inequity with the fact that only about 10% of our students had a learning device at home at the height of the pandemic when it first hit and kids went home for school. Parents may have iPhones or Androids, but those aren't ideal for learning. And their data plans are only for cell phone use or minimal social media use, not downloading books and assignments and turning them in. So we had to print out lessons in reading, math, and science, K through 12. We distributed nearly 50,000 packets. We have about 50,000 students. And throughout the pandemic, we fed about 1 million parents and families with food insecurity in Detroit. It was very clear that with the pandemic not going away anytime soon and challenges with children returning to in-person learning, was successful in mobilizing the business community to raise almost $20 million for students to receive devices, with those devices having internet access, because we had to solve for both problems. It wasn't just a device issue, it was also an internet issue. And fortunately, we were able to do that. We distributed nearly 45,000 devices before the school year started. So when we went about thinking about opening schools or staying online, the fundamental issue or question that had to be asked is, what is the role of the traditional public school system to ensure equitable access to education, while managing the fears and concerns of employees? I've been an educator for 20 years. I've worked in Miami, Jacksonville, New York City. Personally and professionally, never dealt with something harder than opening up schools in the pandemic. And I say that without hesitation. So we felt that because of the unique needs of our families and children that we talk about all the time, that not every parent, not every child would be in a situation to learn from home. And we solved, at least minimally, for the device and internet access, which was a major issue, but there were bigger issues than that. Students with special needs, parents that were not successful in high school and not comfortable directly working with their children. Multiple siblings and having to prioritize the youngest and not the older children. I can go handling multiple jobs, trying to get to work every day. So at the end of the day, our position was we should empower parents to make the decision that they think is best for their children, whether it be online or in-person learning. We worked, it was difficult. We worked with our teachers union to open schools back up, and we gave them the preference to work online or in person. And then we tried to match supply and demand, if you will, with working at learning from home or working in school and matching that with teacher preference. Ultimately, every one of our 100 schools were open at the minimum as learning centers. So children could come in, obviously at no cost. And I say that because I was horrified that public schools actually charged parents for them to go to a learning center at the school. But parents could drop their children off, eat breakfast. Obviously they had their own tablet that they were given or a laptop, they could log in. And then there was a paraeducator, a teacher, an administrator that could help them go through their lessons that they were able to access through their teacher. We quickly moved all of our curriculum online. So everything that we were doing in person could now be done online. All assignments could be submitted that way. We could have interaction similar to what we're doing on Zoom through something called Teams through Microsoft. So teachers taught their regular lessons in a whole group online, and then obviously students would submit assignments after class. At the end of the day, about 10,000 parents decided to send their child for in-person learning or to the learning centers. That was about 10% of our, about 20%, 20 to 25% of our student population decided to go in person or through the learning centers. The other 75% decided to learn online. We implemented everything beyond what the state required us to implement in order to keep employees and students safe, from wearing masks, social distancing, deep cleaning buildings, doing temperature checks every day before students came in, doing a symptoms checker when students came in. With schools being open for 2 months, we only had one outbreak in 100 schools. And that is really a testament to our employees that bought into the COVID safety strategies. And it proved that we could open up schools safely. However, in about mid-November, the positive infection rate had exceeded 5%. And we said that we would use data and science to open schools, and we said we would use data and science to suspend in-person learning. So with the rate at 5% in the city, and then it quickly accelerated to about 6 to 7%, we thought that was too high. It was really more of a risk for our employees than our students. So we suspended in-person learning until January 11th. Our rates are going down a bit, but not much. We're at about 8% right now. We had gotten to almost as high as 9%. So right now, our hope is to be able to open up schools as learning centers in July. So as we look to the future, the major issue right now is there's obviously optimism with the vaccine, but for a lot of Detroiters, they're skeptical about the vaccine because of the history in this country around immunizations, experiments, mainly on Black and brown communities. So there is some cautious optimism, if you will, among Detroiters about the vaccine, but our parents and our employees will not be first in line when it becomes public to take the vaccine. that will create challenges for us for opening next fall. Our role as the district right now is to promote awareness and education about the vaccine. And we're hopeful that by spring, summer, the vaccine will be more accepted in Detroit, and more employees and students will and families will participate in the vaccine. But we're going to probably advocate for choice in person and online going into the fall. We're hoping the legislature funds both online learning and in-person learning, and continues to problem solve with districts around enrollment. When we started the year off, we were about 6,000 students short from where we were the following fall. And that's really just a matter of poverty. We struggle with chronic absenteeism and attendance generally. The pandemic only exacerbated the same challenges that get in the way of daily attendance or that cause chronic absenteeism. We went about with a heavy home-to-home visit plan. Our district administrators, school level staff conducted almost 3,000 home visits at the beginning of the school year, and even in the latter part of the summer. And now we're only down to 600 students that have not reported at some level. So we started at 6,000. We brought that down to 600 because of our home visit process. So it has not been easy, but we continue to work through this. I would say from an innovation point of view, obviously our teachers have been forced to integrate technology in their teaching. It has not been easy, but I think they obviously have grown in that area. So they're just more comfortable teaching through technology, using technology. I always felt that there was a role in technology in education, but I don't believe it can ever replace a face-to-face engagement between a teacher and a student or students in general. But I think the greatest opportunity that I find moving forward is, I'll give you an example. All public schools, but mainly urban public schools, struggle with recruiting and retaining math and science teachers at the high school level to teach the higher level math and science, as let's say calculus, trigonometry, or finding a Chinese language teacher to offer Mandarin, or just foreign languages in general. So the big opportunity for us is we have at least 30 high schools, but in those high schools, usually maybe only 5 or 10 students are taking the really accelerated high-level math and science courses. So one opportunity I think we have moving forward is to leverage the few teachers that we have that teach the upper-level math and science classes and use the platform that we're using now, Teams, to make that class accessible to all high school students throughout the city. So for example, we would schedule second period AP calculus. And we only have 3 or 4 or 5 calculus teachers, high school teachers. So everyone across the city that wants and capable to take AP calculus will log in second period, whether you're on the east side, the west side, or Southwest Detroit, and access AP calculus. I think that is concretely one of the greatest innovations that we'll be able to move forward. And I think that conceptually that made sense before the pandemic, but now it's not conceptual anymore. Now it's not theoretical because teachers have done this and now students have participated in it. And then obviously, I've been a part of creating a virtual school in Miami, in Jacksonville, and we'll create our own virtual school if the state allows us in Detroit, because there are a small group of students that have actually embraced online learning. And I think that's something that we should scale and offer with consistency based on the individual learning styles of children. So that was a short and long of it. Hopefully you got a good sense of where we're at, and looking forward to any questions or concerns you have moving forward.
Adam, do you have any questions for Dr. Vitti? Can't hear.
Sorry, no, not right now.
Okay, thank you, Nikolai. And talking about the high rate of death in Detroit, I know I heard on the radio this morning we lost a great Detroiter. Benny Napoleon passed away. He was the very advanced police chief and sheriff, and another one of the African-American people who have died in the city during this crisis. So Uh, Thank you for all you've done, Nikolai, we'll get back to you in a few minutes, but let's go to Scot Graden now, who's in the Saline district. And Scott, you've seen a lot of growth in the Saline district. You actually are a very big district at this point. Could you just tell us what you've been dealing with, and actually maybe fill us in a little bit about how big Saline has become over the last few years?
Yeah, we have been growing, well over 5,000 students. I will tell you, not long ago, we were half that size. So we're kind of on the southern edge of Ann Arbor, and really our suburban district on our north and east side, and still remain largely rural on our south and west side. And so it does present, the current pandemic has presented us with a couple of different challenges because of the nature of our school district in terms of access to the internet in general, and even spots where hot spots and some of the other technologies that are out there don't necessarily even have a real effectiveness. And so tried to develop strategies, certainly having situations where families can come in, use kind of common areas in our buildings or in our parking areas to access the internet. However, that's not a real sustainable model as you think about families and what strain that puts on them. So our story's similar in a lot of ways to what Dr. Swift and Dr. Vitti talked about in terms of trying to figure out a way to balance the health and safety needs of our community with the need for school and push for, in our case, some in-person learning. And so we had about 30% of our families chose to say we're going to be remote or fully virtual throughout the year, and have gone in that direction. Of the 70% that wanted to come back, we had a phased in approach. We were able to get in person for about 30 school days there in late September through the middle of November. And what really happened, we were able to do it safely. I think schools, smaller schools have a more, frankly, have a better chance given facilities, given the way we're formatted. And so larger districts like Detroit and like Ann Arbor, I think it's a different animal. We've seen districts that are much smaller than us be able to maintain in person longer. You go further west from here, Clinton and some others have been able to do it that are smaller. The challenge we found is not necessarily the outbreak in school, but as we got to mid-November, the community spread that was occurring in our community got it to where school just wasn't sustainable. The adults in our community were getting the virus or getting quarantined due to the virus, and we were not able to effectively staff our buildings. And that really put us in a spot that even if the order hadn't come down, we were likely to need to go to remote just to be able to continue to provide what we were providing. And so I think that's one of the things that sometimes I'll talk to families who say, hey, we weren't seeing the spread in our schools. And that's an accurate statement. We're not immune to the impact of having so many adults face those challenges to where we can fundamentally staff. Strategies around staffing when you're short of subs in the past typically are lumping groups together, putting multiple classes together. And that's the exact opposite of what we've done related to kind of really tight cohorts, not intermingling students, et cetera. And so those are some of the challenges as we look at 2021. If we see a community spread, it's the adult impact of our ability to offer school that'll be the challenge, which then speaks to the vaccine. It's here in Washtenaw County now, and obviously, we get a lot of questions, and our focus has turned to what will that look like? Will our teachers embrace it, and how do we handle that process as we move into the spring? I'm cautiously optimistic that we are facing an opportunity to get more in-person education here in Saline in 2021, but we're not quite there yet.
Scott, Nikolai talked about the challenges of an urban school. What are the challenges of a rural school in this situation?
Yeah, it does come down to access. And so we've obviously, like every district, we are providing devices. And so we've had to get creative about providing internet at homes. And there are a lot of legalities when you start saying we're going to provide school-based and government-funded internet to a private residence. So we partnered with our local foundation, I think called Saline Live, to literally almost like what I would call a volunteer geek squad to go out. A lot of times the issue is that, hey, I have strong internet at home, but my child goes to his grandparents during the day when I'm at work in order to access the education. Well, the grandparent may have internet, may not. And sometimes it's just, they need help setting up a router, setting up a system, getting the kids online. So we've had volunteer in our community who've gone out and met with families and consulted with them, bought routers, bought hotspots, got access to Comcast for them in their homes, and really have acted as a volunteer internet company for us, because those challenges are unique. They're typically 1 or 2 houses down the street. It's not where you can say, hey, we're just going to put up a repeater and catch a bunch of homes. It's almost a ground game, one by one, in the rural areas of our community.
Oh, interesting. Thanks, Scott. We'll get back to you too in a few minutes. I wanted to turn now to the University of Michigan. Before I turn things over to Provost Amy, I want to just do a shout out here and a thank you to an educator we have online. Where is she here? I'm looking for Cynthia Wilbanks. Cynthia, are you still out there? I see, there he is, Cynthia. Can you wave, Cynthia? Hey, Cynthia Wilbanks is going to be, I can't believe I'm saying this, but she will be leaving the University of Michigan in a few days. And Cynthia, how long has it been that you've been with the university?
I've been with the university for over 25 years, Rob, 25. And it's been a great journey, and great to see so many familiar faces this morning. So thank you.
And I want to just say from all of us, thank you for all you've done for the University of Michigan for all these years. Cynthia has worked at multiple roles and is, I know personally, has been kind of the person who has helped. How many presidents now have you worked under?
Well, 6 presidents, including the interims, but you know, it's all been great. I've had a really grand journey. I'm satisfied, Rob.
All right. Well, I'm not betting that you're going to go into retirement for very long, Cynthia, because there'll be somebody calling on you and there'll be something interesting. And I know. So if we all give a hand to Cynthia Wilbanks for all her service. And
thank you very much. Thanks, Rob.
Appreciate it very, very much. I know a lot of people love you, and there are probably a few people that are not happy with you because you've been a tough administrator and you've been very fair to people. And I know you've seen many, many crises and many, many wonderful things happen. For example, the funding of research, I think it started, I don't know what it was, maybe a couple $100 million when you started. Do you know what it is now?
Well, 1.4 billion, but you know, you can't lay that at my doorstep. The faculty and the research community at the University of Michigan is, you know, really without peer, and that is literally true. The #1 public research university in the country, and recognized for its absolutely prolific, excellent, and ongoing commitment to serving the public good. So it's not at my door. You know, I am but a facilitator of making sure that we have you know, the resources and the facilities where I can contribute, and that is just in a small sliver of a way. And you're going to hear from Amy Dittmar right now, who actually has her hands on the controls, if you will, of so many of those activities that have supported the university's ability to grow in that way. But it's been a great ride.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi, we're going to turn it over to Amy now, who was a nice introduction from Cynthia. And Amy, maybe you could give us a little bit of view of what's been happening at the university and what we could expect coming this winter.
Yeah, definitely. First, I want to just second your appreciation of Cynthia. She's been a mentor, a peer, and quite honestly, a friend. So she will be sadly missed.
But mentor to many people.
Yes, many generations, yes, of people. So.
And especially women. That's been great.
Yeah. So anyway, yes. So let me talk a little bit about, I'm going to do a little bit more forward looking, but give a little bit of perspective of where we've been. Like all the other school directors, we pivoted in March, like everyone else, going to fully remote at that time. Through really the end of the summer, we were fully remote. And we learned a lot. We did a lot of work. Actually, Cynthia led a lot of that work in really planning, making sure that our buildings had the right ventilation, that we had spacing, that we had custodial care. We've spent time making sure our students have the technology they needed as we went into fall, that our facilities and our faculty have the technology they needed. So there's just been a whole host of really support that went into starting up in fall. And I'll just briefly talk about that and talk about how it contrasts with what we'll be doing in winter and how it will be similar as well. Other things we had to face, we're really thinking about the funding for our students as well. So financial aid was a huge issue, emergency funds, which of course the federal government helped some with, and the state. So really making sure that they have the needs that they have as well. And so in that, we provided a majority of our classes remotely. In the fall, about 85% of our undergraduate education, our courses, was done remotely, with the rest of them being really focused on areas that need to be done in person to be done safely. And we believe they were done safely in the fall. We really have seen no to very little, if any, transmission in our classrooms, in our research laboratories, or among our employees. And so when we think about how we're going to take our learnings in from fall into winter, really much of what we did in our classrooms will be similar. We do know that the density of our campus, even though it was less in the fall than in previous years, we want to be less dense because the virus is continuing to increase as we move into winter, and we want to increase our testing protocol. So if I look forward then and think about what winter will look like, as I said, the classes will be pretty similar. There'll be just under 90% probably of our undergraduate classes will be remote. A little bit heavier in person for graduate, but still the majority of our graduate programs will be teaching remote as well. And the classes that will be in person are really ones that can't be done any other way. So you're thinking of like the clinical based instruction in nursing, in medicine, in dentistry, lab-based classes in some of your sciences. Some can be done at home and remote, but some can't. And engineering, where you need certain technologies. Or some of our arts programs, like the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. There's amazing work that's been done in our music school on making instruction safe. Masks for tubas, for instance, just to kind of give an idea of some of the amazing work that's been done there. So then the majority of our students, we think, we are a city in a city in many ways. So when we bring students back for classes, they come back to our community. And I know that's an insensitivity for all that live here. And so I think it's important to think about what our campus will look like. If the majority of our students have classes remotely, that means that they can be where it is safest for them to be. And that's what we've encouraged them to do. For many of our students, that means their permanent residence. And so we have encouraged them to stay at their permanent residence, or what they might think of as their home, if that is the best place for them. But we also know that for some of our students, that's not the case. For some of our students, the home life is not conducive to learning, or it might be that they are one of these students that has the in-person instruction and need to be here. So we are going to have limited space in our residence halls. To give some perspective, in a normal pre-pandemic year, we house a little under 10,000 undergrads in our housing. Last semester, we housed 6,400. We're going to be less than 2,000, and everyone will have single rooms. So it's going to be much less dense there. And there was an application process, which actually continues to go on as people are evaluating their life circumstances. Our graduate student housing that we provide in residence halls is much different. It's more like an apartment setting. So that'll be about the same. There's a couple thousand. And for graduate students, this really is their year-round residence typically. So they will not really have much change going into the winter. We also know that our graduate students and many of our upperclassmen don't live on our campus. They live in the apartments around town, and they have leases. And many of those are year-long leases. They heard the same message, that they should be where is the safest for them to be in. For many of them, we believe that's their permanent residence. But that being said, we can't really stop them from coming into a lease that they pay for. And so we're really being very careful as we move into winter that we have a testing and a communication plan that encompasses not just those in our residence halls, but overall, which I'll talk a little bit about as well in just a moment. But I also want, before I get to testing and vaccines and some of the medical side of health and wellness, I want to hit on the other sides of health and wellness, which many of the other superintendents did. And that's kind of the overall health of the individual. We have found this to be an incredibly stressful and mentally draining time for really everyone on campus, but in particular, I would say for our students. And so we've really been mindful of that as we go forward into the winter. Based on state, guidance, we are able to have a public health limited rec centers and other facilities open, and we think that's important. And so we've worked really hard to make sure that those facilities are there for our students, so they have something other than just sitting in their dorm room or their apartment doing schoolwork and can take care of their whole self. We have added more counseling services to our CAPS. That's going to be, has been provided both in person as well as remotely throughout, as well as added some online services to help our students with their mental wellness. And going into winter, we're going to add some wellness days, similar actually to what Ann Arbor schools did, and maybe some of the others, where you have kind of a day in the middle of the week as a break. There's a couple of those throughout the semester. So one of the biggest probably pivots or ramping up that we're doing in winter is our testing protocol. Everyone following the news knows that there's been a lot of differences in the way universities have approached testing. So moving into winter, we will do this similar to what we did in fall and have a required pre-arrival test for anyone in our residence halls, a required negative. Probably more importantly, the change will be that we will have weekly testing for everyone in our community available, and that will be required for our undergrads. So all undergrads that come onto campus for any activity, they will have to have a weekly test. So that means not just our students in our residence halls and in-person classes, but if they come into the library, there'll be a check to make sure that they have their weekly test. If they come into the union, so that'll be kind of our way to make sure that we police that, if you will, and monitor their activity. For our graduate students, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that a lot of the danger of this has been brought home by us football fans who are following the widespread of this. When you do get students together, and like 50% of the football team, I guess, is estimated to have had either the COVID or be in quarantine. So it's dramatic about how these young people can spread the disease rapidly among them.
Yeah, and that's why the communication to the off-campus students is so important. I mean, we will, and to make sure we capture all of them, because much of that activity happens, as I said, not in our classrooms, or honestly, even in football, it may not be on the football field. It might be in their social gatherings of the students, and we've seen that throughout many of our programs. So that's why the difference in the testing protocol for the graduate and the undergrad is really the prevalence of the virus. It's going to be required for undergrads, and for our graduate students, it's going to be recommended and available, but not required, because we just didn't have much spread of the virus there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to thank you, Amy, for that.
Yeah.
We're going to get back to you, but I want to give Adam Pasick a chance to respond. Adam has been covering this from the Times. Adam, you want to talk about your experience and maybe respond to the panelists so far?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Adam. I'm Rob's son, if you probably hadn't guessed. I work at the Times on newsletters, and since October, I've been the co-author of our coronavirus briefing newsletter. I'm sorry, coronavirus schools newsletter, which takes a really close look at how this is affecting K through 12 and higher learning. And so I think it's been really interesting to hear what the superintendents and Amy have had to say. I feel like there are a couple of broad themes that have been really kind of present throughout our reporting, which you guys have all kind of addressed different aspects of. I mean, for one, is just that this has been a disastrous year for kids and for students overall. Like the levels of lost learning are going to be really felt for a really long time. And I think we're only kind of coming to grips now with, the hit that a lot of students have taken, and also that it's just really exposed a lot of the kind of existing inequalities and problems in the education system that were there before the coronavirus. But now that we're seeing their impact, it's really stark. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of the kind of divide among a lot of families about whether they want their kids in school or not, how that reflects kind of some deep levels of mistrust that a lot of families probably justifiably have about American institutions and the education system in particular, that we're seeing parents, when parents have the choice about to choose whether their kids go to school or not, we're really seeing who trusts the school system to keep their kids safe. And it really breaks down on, racial and income level. And so I think that just shows kind of the big challenges that the education system has in front of it. They've been made very stark, and have kind of put them, have taken some things that were maybe a little bit under the surface and have just put them kind of front and center, that we all now have to realize are really important problems to deal with. I mean, I'm really interested, as a journalist, I'm really interested in, we're at this kind of pivot point now where there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines. It's very unclear how that's going to play out with schools and how it will affect schools' ability to reopen. As Nikolai said, a lot of families are distrustful of the vaccine, and a lot of those families are the same ones who are uneasy about sending their kids back to school. So that just kind of compounds that problem. And I think it's going to be a really probably politically dicey time where you have a new administration coming in. You've got some kind of battle lines, especially in a lot of cities like Chicago, where the union and the city are like in a very kind of hardened battle stance against each other, and it's unclear how that's all going to play out. So how it works out with vaccines and teacher unions and distrustful parents, how that all is going to shake out, I think is really going to tell the tale of the next few months. And I think everyone is kind of assuming this school year was a mess, understandably, for very obvious reasons. So a lot of people are already thinking forward to fall of 21 and thinking about what that's going to look like. And, is that going to be a return to normal year? It's looking kind of increasingly questionable. I think even after the vaccine hopefully kind of dies down, we're still going to be dealing with a lot of the after effects of all this. So my colleagues and I at the Times are super interested in this story. It's great to hear your stories about what's going on in your individual districts. But I am kind of really just here to listen and kind of hear what you guys are most worried about and how you think the next months and even beyond are going to play out.
Adam, question for you about the colleges. I know you've also been covering that very carefully, and what are some of the key learnings there and key challenges that lie ahead?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting that higher education is such a broad, it's such a broad field that you have some very small schools that handle things one way. You have huge schools like Michigan that handle it a different way. I think hopefully there were a lot of lessons learned over the course of this school year that will kind of tee up institutions for more success, and kind of there's more of a playbook now for how to handle things like testing. We know where the big kind of infection risks are, right? It's not necessarily, like you mentioned, the football team. It's not necessarily the football team going out and practicing. It's the football team like sitting down for a team meal. And it's not necessarily that kids are passing the virus around in classrooms. It's that they're maybe passing it to the broader community. And you see like a lot of nursing homes in college towns were among the hardest hit, not because anyone was being intentionally incautious, but just because we know we're learning more and more about the way the virus spreads and how young people can often be asymptomatic, but then are, posing risks sometimes to the broader community. And hopefully we're learning a little bit more about how to control that.
Thank you very much. We're going to open up to questions at this point. I see a lot of questions on the chat line, and before I do that, I want to. One area we haven't covered is Yvette out there. Yvette McElroy Anderson. Yvette, can you come on if you're out there? She's from Washtenaw Community College, and we haven't talked about the community colleges. But can you give us a little bit of update on what's happening at Washtenaw, and maybe if you know generally what are some of the challenges at the community college level, where so many students who are in between having enough money to go to college and who do not go to school right now?
Hi, Rob. Thank you. Thank you for asking me. And it's Wayne County Community
College.
County, sorry.
Okay.
We serve 43 cities in Wayne County, and our chancellor is Dr. Curtis L. Ivory. So we are challenged, Wayne County Community College District, and we are challenged, as is education. We have a number of students that are doing their education remotely, and we are challenged because there are a number of our students that don't have the technology in order to be successful in maintaining a virtual space. We have pivoted very, very effectively. Our faculty members at the onstart of this were really ready and found ways to meet students where they are in terms of helping them toward completion. But I was just reading some research about how a number of students in underserved areas have situations where they are sharing technology. Like there's one piece of technology for the entire household, and those things coupled with poverty and the inequities that Adam just talked about are, of course, they're impacting our students, their ability to attend, complete. Early on in the Detroit area, we had a high incidence of people that were experiencing testing positive for COVID, a number of deaths, and we have intergenerational households that are, persist in our area as well. But Wayne County Community College has done a great job in pivoting. They've done a great job in offering to meet students where they are. Of course, things are impacting enrollment for us as well as they are for education all around.
Yeah, I would think, Yvette, with a lot of your focus in community colleges on trades, that would be very difficult as well. I mean, how do you teach trades remotely when people have to have those hands-on experiences?
And something, Rob, you can't teach the trades remotely. And those are the areas where we are going to have to look at how we reset that for the coming year for our students. Like someone else said, I think it was Amy, talking about the clinicals and the, our dental hygiene students and our nursing students that have to have that face-to-face opportunity for their learning and completion. But the trades, that's a whole nother ball game.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned today that Benny Napoleon died last night, and as the chief of police, he said that the biggest way that we can improve policing, which he said is very broken, is by improving education. I think that's and he was saying that so many of the students who end up with police problems are young people who do that are not educated properly. So we can't emphasize enough. Nikolai has talked about the challenges in his district, but throughout the country, we're really seeing the inequities play out. Nikolai, do you want to make any more comments about what you're hearing from Yvette or from the other superintendents? This is Nikolai Vitti, who is the superintendent of Detroit, for those who just tuned in.
I think everything was said at some point by superintendents, leaders of universities. Adam, I think, wrapped everything up and gave a good, strong summary of really how the pandemic has highlighted the inequities that were already here. And I think Adam did a good job of talking about how the vaccine, although on the surface is seen as a way to bring us back to school full scale, will be another dividing point as we work through this. I am optimistic that with Joe Biden being the president-elect, some of the politics, some of the distrust may be put to the side, and there will be a greater willingness to problem solve and collaborate when we think about the teacher unions, when we think about communities of color. That's going to be a positive shift. There was great skepticism, great distrust, and just a complete negative reaction to the president's approach about just opening up schools with no strategies, thoughtfulness, funding. And that was an immediate negative reaction from teacher unions and communities of color. And I think that with Biden's election, there will be a shift in conversation. I think the unions will react differently. They'll still be skeptical, But I think there will be a different positive momentum moving forward and greater ownership. Under a Biden administration, there has to be something that's different as we go into the next school year. And I think that obviously comes with the vaccine, but working with local communities is going to be a key, especially in Detroit, to bring confidence and awareness and educate folks to the vaccine.
I'm glad you brought up the unions, Nikolai, because unions have taken it on the chin for years, teachers unions, and I think that there's again blame cast their way, and I feel like the whole idea of collaboration, that we have to think about how to keep everybody safe, and that the unions are really trying to represent what's best for the children as well. So I wonder if any of the other superintendents could talk about some of the things that have been, how you're dealing with the unions. Go ahead, Nikolai.
Yeah, one last point. I just want to emphasize, as if this is the last time I speak, about the mental health issue and the impact on children. There's been people that throw around the term, Marshall Plan, and I don't know how to frame it the right way, but we're going to need, if we're really serious about children, and the children, how they have been affected in this pandemic, we need serious resources at schools. And I say schools, not just because I'm a superintendent of a K-12 system, but we are where children are at, and we can serve them in the most consistent, reliable way because they're with us. We need an infusion of support on the mental health side and ways to make up for learning loss, whether that's summer, extended year, longer day, and just thinking differently about what it means to have been a student in this pandemic. Serious issues. I cannot speak to any child at any level and not hear hurt, alienation, detachment, frustration, and we have to cope with that and figure that out as a country, because if not, we're going to see long-lasting impact from this. Kids are resilient, but they don't always have to be, and I think that's what we have to figure out moving forward.
I'd like to open up to other superintendents to have other comments, that reaction to what you've heard so far, or questions that have come up that you see on the chats.
Thank you, Rob. I'd love to jump in if that's all right.
Yes, please. It's Jeanice Swift, Ann Arbor Superintendent.
I really appreciate Adam and Nikolai and Scott bringing up the issue with trust and a return for students to school. We have throughout the fall worked with our most at-risk and neediest students through our community centers, because what we've heard from our students in poverty and our Black and Brown students and families is that we know they've experienced the pandemic very, very differently. Many of them, many have had illness in their own families, and even deaths occur among their own circle. So we've worked through the community centers. We provided our staffing into those areas, serving children, providing the food, the technology, the connectivity, and that idea of trust and parents trusting. We find that they're more likely to trust sending that child to the community center, which is typically a short walk, as opposed to putting them on a bus to go to a school. So we have in Ann Arbor taken a little bit different path, and we'll continue to do more of that as we move into January and beyond. In addition, had a very robust summer program last summer, more than 5,000 students, including 500 students with specialized learning needs on an IEP, receiving recovery services and learning services through the summer. And we are already planning even a bigger program for next summer. So Dr. Vitti, I'm right with you that this idea of looking ahead to, we need to emerge from this pandemic with a systemized approach to supports for students like we've never had before. And I believe we can all agree on that, and particularly our students who suffer from the inequities that this pandemic, those inequities have always been there, but the pandemic has kind of laid them open. So I hope that's helpful. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share just a little bit of the work. Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome. Scott, do you have any reactions, questions?
Yeah, I obviously I agree with Dr. Vitti and Dr. Swift. One of the areas that there's the inequity issue, which I think cuts across all K-12. The learn to read subset is one that I think we've started to really get concerned about, and that's kind of that K-1-2 level, and how are we going to have effective strategies to quickly assess and make sure that because the literacy skills at those levels is critical. And while many parents and many families have strategies around reading, I really feel like that's one that we need to catch quickly in order to make sure, if we're trying to mitigate the impact, those foundational skills are critical. And so I think the assessment piece, hopefully that can be done a little bit later this year yet, so that it can set us up and we can devise our plan that it will involve additional time. It's going to involve a lot of strategies that we probably haven't used before. And I think systemically, and Dr. Vitti's discussed it, look to the state for some policy adaptations. And I think a continued blending of enrollment funding is a critical component of that. Districts need to focus on the mitigation of the impact, as opposed to whether or not we're going to be making, reducing class size, we're making cuts. That's a strategy or an issue that needs to be dealt with sooner rather than later, so we can all focus on dealing with the impact.
Thank you, Scott. Adam, a question came up from Tom. Is Tom still there? Tom Cairns? Maybe he signed off. But it was talk a little bit more about this informed choice and trust in the schools. I think people were quite interested in that dilemma.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really comes down, there was one issue before we had the vaccine. It was about, whether families felt like their kids would be safe going to school, right? That's a really basic decision. And I don't think it's surprising. I mean, I'm in New York, which is, 1.1 million kids in the school system, overwhelmingly from families of color, a huge number of low-income kids, 100,000 kids who are homeless in the school system. And the virus hit hardest in the communities, in those communities of color and those poorer communities. I mean, I live in Jackson Heights, which was one of the real epicenters of the epicenter for a while. And it takes a real toll on people's ability to kind of send their kids off in the morning and think they'll be okay. Now that we have the vaccine, I think it really is going to be an interesting public health communications challenge. For people to kind of convince the communities that clearly need the most help that this vaccine is safe. Mind you, we're not talking about a pediatric vaccine. That's probably a year away. This is really about vaccinating teachers, vaccinating janitors, vaccinating all the adults that are needed to make a school work, and then eventually vaccinating families. But I think, it's going to be a real challenge because people have had a lot of reasons not to trust institutions and the government over the last year and over the last decade and generations going way back. And so it's not going to be an easy thing to just flip that switch. I mean, I have full faith that the vaccine has kind of gone through adequate safeguards, but I'm not a typical person. I've been kind of up to my neck in all this, and I'm coming from a lot of privilege. So I think it's going to be a real challenge, and I think it's not going to be a clean or easy process.
Oh, thank you. Naomi, you've got a question out there. Naomi, Andre, you still there? I think we've lost Naomi. I got to keep the people on the board here. Well, I think we're at a point. I'm going to open up. Anybody who's on screen now that has a question or a comment, please just raise your hand and we'll let you comment on things. So there's Tom back. So would anybody, if people have questions or comments for the panel or just want to say something themselves, please raise your hand and this is the opportunity.
I'm really sorry, everyone. I have the school's newsletter on deadline in about 2 hours, so I actually have to jump off and write this thing. But it's been great hearing from you all. Anyone can get my contact information through Rob over here, and it really was a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Proud of you. Anybody else out there? I know there's some educators out there, people who've been part of the university, teachers. Any other comments that people have, or questions they have about what's coming up?
Hey, Rob, Sarah Eggleston here. I have 3 teenagers, and we're in our public schools.
Talk about mental health issues. You got it.
No, you know what? I'm like your son. We're fortunate. We have privileges, and we're not as impacted as other families. So I feel almost guilty sharing that. But one of my concerns is that when the school started and everyone was given a little Chromebook, the posture that is required for a child to use a laptop is just horrific. And we are fortunate enough that we were able to get quality chairs and external monitors and keyboards and get our children situated. They are doing wonderfully, but I do think part of it is that their physical health is addressed in their home working environment. And I'm an ergonomic consultant, so it's easy for us to make it a priority. Again, this is what I do. So the poor children, but I really think that's something that we want to look at is, and we have reached out to the schools saying, educating teachers, encouraging them to get children to change their posture and get on and off calls and move about. I just think it's something that's very beneficial for the children that are in these computer-centric environments.
Thank you, Sarah. And we were talking about, you said, you feel like very fortunate. And I was thinking about a family I know where they have 5 children all in school, and wow. They're living in a trailer.
Oh dear.
The income comes from the mother, who's a cleaning lady and has lost a lot of her work over the last several months, and her husband, who's works in a restaurant. Mm-hmm. So, this is just to imagine that kind of a five kids in a trailer, 2 parents struggling to work, and 2 of the kids have special needs. So,
dear Rob,
I think we can count our blessings but also think about ways to reach out to these people that are in such dire straits. And Nikolai, I'm sure my story is not an unfamiliar one to you in terms of the kind of situations that you encounter, all of you. Including Jeanice. I mean, these are not hidden. They're in plain sight. We just don't tend to look.
So, Rob, this is Jan McDermott. I don't have kids in the school any longer, but I wanted to relay a story that emphasizes how some families are dealing with this. We have a neighbor here in Georgetown who has 3 small children, all in elementary school, all learning remotely. And the mother and the father both obviously having to work. They solved the problem by inviting grandma, who is a retired teacher from Buffalo, New York, to come and be with those children during the day to supervise their learning. Now, they were lucky enough to be able to have that resource. And I was lucky enough in the middle of a pandemic, owning a hospitality property, to be able to house them so they could have a respite from the children in the evening. But these are unique solutions that are being facilitated by parents who are committed to the education of their children. And I don't think we give enough credit to or accolade to the extent they are going to provide for their children's education and still struggling for it to be successful.
It's a great story, Jan. Thanks for sharing that. I want to turn to Loretta Thomas, who's on board, and Loretta just recently retired from the university. Loretta, comment, question?
Thank you. I wanted to ask the speakers, the superintendents, a question. I'm a member of a couple of community organizations that worked on literacy. We're concerned about literacy, and we're working on that before the pandemic. We are doubly concerned about learning loss during the pandemic, and we want to help. What are things that community agencies such as the Ann Arbor chapter of Delta Sigma Theta or the Ann Arbor chapter of the Lynx, what can we do either now or or in the near-term future to be supportive?
Jeanice, I'm going to ask you to speak on that. Lorita's in your community. What immediate reach out can we do?
Sure. I really appreciate your work, Lorita, on the cause of literacy. That is absolutely a critical endeavor. We can always use the very similar help as in normal times, and that is anyone who can read with the child, and the provision of books into those homes that maybe do not have books. We have provided the full academic reader library and the full regular library on the device. But I think we all know there's nothing like holding a book in your hands. And I know our area organizations continue on that work as well. One of the exciting features of the tech library and academic materials is that they have particular tools to support students who struggle with dyslexia. The text is a weighted text. There is ability to highlight the text, and those books the child can press and the passage will be read aloud to them, or they may press on a word to get a definition. So there are some kind of exciting developments in the work that we're doing. But as a former English teacher, I cleaved back to those fundamentals of, if you have an ability to join on a Zoom and read aloud to a child, or have a child read to you, that those are the moments that parents many parents are challenged right now with time. And if that can occur, and I really appreciate Jan, the story about the family and all the steps that they've taken to arrange for their children to have support during this time. Any wraparound of support on literacy is exactly the right steps for all of us to take as a community. So thank you for that.
I'm going to call on Kit Wanty. You submitted a question. Kit, can you turn on there and ask your question? I know you're the parent of a couple kids in the schools in Ann Arbor. Morning.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. This is such an impactful call. It's been really nice to hear all the work being done and problem solving for our children. I am wondering about curriculum right now. And as a parent of a freshman and a senior at Pioneer High School in Ann Arbor, it just seems to be really overwhelming and in a lot of work. And I wonder if there are going to be any changes to curriculum coming up that would help, some of this, the loss of the in-person learning right now.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you raising that excellent question around curricula. Really, we're looking at it in about 3 ways. And one is just what you've said, is the pacing of that curricula. We all know, just from being on calls like this all day and long days, that it's impossible to cover everything on a Zoom that you might cover in a regular classroom. And that just what you've said, when we try to do that, it's a tremendous load on our students and frankly on our staff. So we are looking at ahead to those summer programs and the ability to reinforce student academic development and skills, because not everyone is going to be able to to acquire all, to cover all the curricular, acquire all of it. The second component that our teachers are working on, and again, they're changing their practice literally on a dime, but it's that the way that teaching learning occurs in virtual needs to be very different than the way it occurs in face-to-face. And so there's a unique pedagogy there, and you're exactly right that that really needs to be fully developed. Folks are learning as they go, and so certainly we're not perfect at this point. I do also want to point to scope and sequence. So that's a third area I would point to, is what you will see is the teaching to those fundamental standards in each content area. But that does not mean that we won't need to circle back in the summer and in the fall to some of those fundamental and critical standards in each of the content areas to make sure that students are lifted up. One thing we've looked at also is really trying to help our teachers to understand that they don't have to cover everything. And that, I think, is what you're referring to, is just people trying to pace in such a way to cover everything. And we just can't. It's not practical this year. So one of the shifts we've made is that asynchronous Wednesday, we really have asked that teachers not introduce new concepts on the asynchronous Wednesday. And I appreciate you mentioning Pioneer. It is at the high schools that we struggle with this the most, but we really are trying to pivot to where that Wednesday is a reinforcement, an extension, deepening the exploration, and not assigning a whole extra chapter for that day. So hopefully you'll begin to see that occurring a little bit more of a relaxed approach to fit the Zoom pandemic life that we currently have, knowing that we're going to need to continue to fill the bucket through summer and next fall as we go forward. I really appreciate you raising that issue. I apologize, Rob, but
a lot of people have to jump off.
I'm going to have to get to my next thing, but it's so great to see you all today. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Scott. I just want to say I'm very deeply touched by some messages I've gotten either privately or on the chat about reaching out to this family with the 5 children in the trailer. And if anybody wants to contribute, I'm happy to get the money to these people. And it also just reinforces for me that this Christmas season, one of the best things we might do is just hand out cash to people who need it. And you know, we hopefully this Congress will get its act together and get this cash to people. But people are really strapped right now, worse than ever. And I think we're not even hearing about the stories. And this is going to be the stories like we heard from our parents about the Great Depression. And so those of us that have the cash, you know, instead of making the wish lists on Amazon for the things that we really don't need, maybe it's time to turn that around and say, please just give this money to the people in the community who need it. So I want to thank you all for that. Any last comments? I just heard somebody say something.
Oh, it's Jerry Markle.
Yeah, Jerry.
What I did is I gave gift certificates to restaurants around town. Instead of just buying whatever or giving cash. I think that's one way of helping local places. Yeah,
we haven't even touched on the economic issues, the impact on these communities of the economy. So thank you all very much for participating. This video will be up on Monday on my website, and you can receive my Dr. Rob newsletter with this in it on Monday. If you're not subscribed, please do. Let me know. And thank you so much to the speakers. God bless, and everybody take good care of themselves and be generous this holiday season.
Thank you, Rob.